Okay? Let me give you some more laws. We're right in here. Now these laws, this is the theoretical stuff, and some people are going nuts already about that, but that's okay. This is important. These principles will save your life. There's what I call the laws for well-being, and I'm going to talk about two of these laws very, very briefly. The first law of well-being is this. It's the law of provident living. Now, what's provident living? So some people that may haven't heard that concept before, they're going like, what is provident living? Provident living is nothing more than making provisions for the future. If you're doing something today to be ready for tomorrow, next week, next year, next decade, next millennium, next eternity, if you're doing something today to be ready for that, that's provident living. That's all there is to it. So if we're talking about being ready for an emergency, that's just provident living. So is getting an education, getting a job, and saving money. All of those things are a part of provident living. All right, let me give you the 4 points of provident living. There's a list of 4. There's an order of priority that's critically important that you understand what they are, and they go in order of priority. Don't mix them up. You'll get in trouble if you try that. The first one of these is, the first point, I like to use the key word spiritual. Now, each one of us may have to define that any way that you want to. That's okay. And this is not the forum to discuss that in here, but I will be very plain with you. For me, my foundation is in the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what I believe that it should be. Whatever you have chosen, I'm going to say that's okay for you because we are free agents to make those choices. But you need to figure out where your spiritual roots are, and you hang on to that, because there is more to you than meets the eye. There's more depth of character, capacity, possibility, energy, future in you than you can possibly imagine, and you need to nurture that above anything else. So that's number 1 on my list of provident living. Number 2, now this is the one that makes the difference between whether you live or die when things really get bad. When everything comes down around your ears and it can't possibly get any worse, but it does. This is the one that will make all the difference. I like to use the key word attitude. We could spend 8 hours on attitude. It's so critically important. But let me define it for you this way, very, very simply and quickly. I believe the best way that I know of to describe to you what I mean by attitude is simply this. It is how you emotionally react or respond to what's going on around you. And I hope that you understand that there is a huge difference between how you react or how you respond. Respond and react are very, very different. What I mean by that is reaction is kind of like the knee-jerk reaction. You know, somebody whacks the knee and leg kicks up and kicks whatever's in the way. Couldn't help it, it just happened. That's reactionary. You do not want to be a reactionary person. You want to learn. Key word is learn. You want to learn how to respond to the things that happen around you, to respond properly, appropriately, safely, wisely. So, attitude, and developing an attitude that says, I can be okay no matter what happens to me. I will be okay. I choose to be okay. How do you develop an attitude like that? You don't just look in the mirror one day and smile and say, oh, I got a good attitude, I'll be okay no matter what. That doesn't work. Now, it's okay to make the decision that I want to have an attitude that says I'll be okay no matter what, but you're going to have to go to work and do something about it. And the key to, and if you don't think that's true, let me give you this example right here very simply. Everybody, I'm looking around, everybody in this room has either been a teenager or has had a teenager. Now, that's a study in attitudes, isn't it? When you were there or when you had somebody that was there. I'll tell you, I learned something about attitudes. Now, I laugh about this now. At the time, it wasn't funny all the time, but I did chuckle a little bit about it. One time, I found myself with 5 teenage sons all at once. And there were times when I said to myself, how in the world could this happen? We didn't think about this part of it. I do not have any teenage sons left, and I didn't kill any of them. I thought about it occasionally. I heard the youngest one is beyond teenage years right now, and it was wonderful, actually. We all learned from that. The reason I tell you about this is, think about it. If you want to change the attitude of a 15-year-old, think about it. You get in their face and pick them up by the collar and say, boy, you got a bad attitude, straighten that out right now. Well, that'll change his attitude, but probably not in the direction you want it to go. And the reason I tell you that is it's exactly the same way with you. You don't just look in the mirror someday and say, I now have a good attitude, I'll be okay. How do you change attitudes? You do it with number 3 on my list that I'm giving you. Number 3 point in the law of provident living is knowledge. Knowledge is number 3. Let me give you the proper definition of knowledge. This is so important. See, in this little setting that we have right here, do you understand that I cannot share any knowledge with you? The only thing I can share is information, data. So what's the definition of knowledge? Knowledge is defined as information multiplied by experience. My job in this area that we're talking about is to give you the most correct, true, proper, credible information that I possibly can, and then motivate you to go get the experience with it, because then it becomes a part of you and it can't be taken away from you. And then when the things happen, when the stuff happens in your life, your attitude is, well, I know what to do about this. I've already practiced, I've played with it, I've tried it, I've done this before. So you don't have to hit the wall, you don't have to cry, you don't have to break down, you just simply say, well, darn, I didn't want this to happen, but here it is, I guess I'll deal with it, because I will be okay. Now then, number 4 on this list of things is, I like to use the key word, stuff. Material things, but I use stuff because it kind of de-emphasizes a little bit. Here's the order of priority: spiritual, attitude, knowledge, and then the stuff, the things, the material things. What I'm telling you is this, is your safety does not depend on having a kit. I hear people, they're selling the concept of what you need is an emergency kit. It may be a 72-hour kit, it may be a 2-week kit, it may be a year-long kit, whatever it is. Now, I'm not telling you that stuff is unimportant, because every one of those 4 things you have to have in your life or you're going to die. You must have stuff. But what I'm telling you is this, is that your safety does not depend on what you own. The bigger statement might be this: your personal worth, who you are, does not depend on what you own. It depends on what? It's what's inside of your head, what's in your heart, and what you can do with your fingertips with the stuff around you. That's what determines your worth, not what you own. Ownership of stuff is great, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that. It just doesn't determine who you are. It shouldn't. Now, on this idea of attitude, I'd love to spend more time in here. We just don't have the time for it. I'm going to give you a reference right here that I would like you to consider very strongly. This book, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. This is an important book, I believe, in this area of preparedness and survival. And what I want you to do is, I tell you, go buy the book and read it, is what I'm telling you. Get the book and read the book. Now, what's it about? It's about Viktor Frankl's experience in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II. That's about as bad as it gets. And he asked the question because he saw people in there. He saw people in the worst of circumstances. I mean, where it was really bad, the worst of all. And some of them were making it. And he saw other people that had the better advantages, and they weren't making it. He said, what's going on? See, it wasn't in the stuff around them. It was what was inside of them. And that's the point. The first 2/3 of that book, I believe, is very important for you to read. If you say, I want to make it no matter what, get the book, read it, learn from it, and go practice some of the concepts, develop them within your life. Okay, another law in these laws for well-being. I wrote 6 of them for myself. I'm going to talk about 2 of them. The last of them, number 6, is this. I call it the law of freedom. You say, how does freedom fit into this whole thing? This is not a political statement, although it could work. The law of freedom. First off, let me give you the definition of fear. You say, fear. How does fear fit into this? It's very important. Because when you're filled with fear, you're no longer free. It's how it works. Think about that. Anytime that you've been driven, controlled by fear, you were not in control of yourself. The fear was in control. So you have to define and understand what fear is. Let me give you a one-word definition of fear. Not a description of what it feels like, where it comes from, but a definition of fear. I believe that it's the only true and correct definition of fear. One word, very simply, ignorance. Ignorance defines fear better than anything that I know of. Now, another thing that you could do with fear is let's turn it into an acronym, you know, F-E-A-R, put a period behind each one of those letters, and it now stands for false evidence appearing real. That's what fear is about. false evidence appearing real. Let me give you a description for freedom. Maybe you'd even call it a definition of freedom. Now, I wrote for myself this statement a number of years ago when I was learning how to teach these things, and I wanted to make them very, very clear and very succinct. And so I looked up the words that I used in this definition for freedom. I looked them up in the dictionary, and I used power words and absolute words. Think about them. And if you write this down, I want you to go look up the definition of these words and consider this statement. It is impossible. Power, absolute word, impossible. It is impossible to fear anything for which you have true and complete knowledge. I believe that statement is true. It is impossible to fear anything for which you have true and complete knowledge. By the way, somebody said it far better than I. Look it up in the Bible. John 8:32. And the truth shall make you free. You could insert knowledge. That's how it works, folks. There's another law called the law of outcomes. And when I was putting that thing together, and I've been teaching these courses for a while, I said, how can I organize this in a way that people can understand it very quickly? The law of outcomes simply says this: you can know the end from the beginning if you follow the rules. One of the first things that you have to do is say, what is it that I face? What am I facing? If you don't even know what you're facing, you can't deal with it. So you have to get honest with yourself. Remember the principle of position that I told you about? You have to know what it is you're dealing with. Once you know what it is, you can deal with it. So you have to know what you face. Then you have to decide what outcome you want. Now, deciding doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it's the first step. Once you know what the outcome is that you want, you have to know what it is that you can do, what it is that you know and you can do. You have to take a look at what it is that you have. You have to ask yourself, what is it that I can afford to do and put together? Then you make a commitment. You absolutely make the commitment that you will do whatever it takes. And in the process of doing that, you have now written your plan of action, and then it's very simple, go do it. Now, in a very brief overview, that's the law of outcomes. If you will follow that, you'll never fail. It's very simple. Okay, let me give you the first law of survival. Now, I sometimes make the point, I don't like to teach or talk about survival, because survival is kind of negative. It kind of means like, well, you go through all this terrible, awful stuff, and they come rescue you and take you off to the hospital, you know, and then 10 o'clock news comes and interviews you, and you're in the newspaper, and you make USA Today and those kinds of things, and they say, he survived. Well, I'll tell you what, if that's survival, folks, I don't want to have anything to do with it. When things happen in life, I just want to live right through them and keep on going. I don't care if anybody else knows about it. I'm just going to be okay. It's a part of life. The first law of survival is this. Now think about this. If you're going to survive very, very tough situations, it is almost entirely a matter of luck. Oh, luck. You mean you have to be lucky? Yes. But you have to understand my definition of luck. We have to turn luck into an acronym. This is not about going to Las Vegas and rolling the dice kind of luck. I don't believe in that kind of luck. This is the definition of luck. Acronym: laboring under correct knowledge. Now, I can deal with that kind of luck. Laboring under correct knowledge. In other words, you determine your own luck. Perhaps another way of putting it is this: a definition of luck is when preparedness and opportunity cross. That statement that I made at the very beginning, that quote, that fortune favors a prepared mind. Second law of survival. In order to make it through very extreme conditions, you must learn CPR. You must learn CPR. Now, there are two kinds of CPR. One CPR is what the Red Cross will teach you. By the way, that's a very valuable skill, but that CPR is a skill. I'm talking about the law CPR. And CPR stands for courage, patience, and resourcefulness. If you do not possess courage, patience, and resourcefulness, you will not make it. Without courage, you'll quit. You won't go through the tough things. Without patience, you won't stick it out and endure. Without resourcefulness, you won't do the things that you have to do no matter what. You must possess CPR. Will someone please just tell me what to buy? No, I won't. Because if I just tell you what to buy, you're going to give up and die when it gets really tough. That's the bottom line. The law of stuff I call the law of wilderness wisdom. And wilderness wisdom was a very simple and short way of putting together what your priorities are in terms of having material things. Here is the law of wilderness wisdom. Order of priority is extremely important that you understand this order of priority. Top of the list. Now, we're not talking about mental, emotional, spiritual, all those things. We're talking about the physical law of you making it no matter what. We're inside of a beautiful snowstorm. This is the winter of 2007, and I wanted to update you on some things that are just important to understand. When I talk about the stuff things, now remember inside of the law of Provident Living, we had the spiritual, attitude, knowledge, and then we come to stuff, the material things. When we talk about the stuff part of things, these material things, I like to use the word wilderness wisdom. Sometimes people say, oh, wilderness wisdom, I'm not going out in the wilderness. Well, think about it. When your life is not normal, when things are upside down, whether you're at home or whether you're away from home, that's a wild and unfamiliar place. And so wilderness wisdom, I think, fits all the time. Well, wilderness wisdom is broken into two categories of things when we're talking about the material things. The first one of these categories I call the survival parachutes. Now, the survival parachutes is very important for you to understand. I know that sometimes I don't like to use the word survival because it has negative connotations, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. Think about this. What's a parachute? Well, a parachute is one of these things, if you have it on and you fall out of a plane and you use it right, you'll be okay, right? Okay? Think about the parachute principle for a moment. Suppose that you fall out of a plane and you don't have a parachute on. Does gravity care? It doesn't make any difference if you were going to buy a parachute next week. Gravity doesn't care. It's an immutable law. You're going to plummet because gravity's job is to suck you to the center of the earth until something gets in the way. We call it the ground. Okay? If you fall out of a plane and you say, wait, I have a parachute. It's in the plane. And if you don't have it on, does gravity care? It doesn't care that you have a parachute and it's not on you. All right, suppose you're falling and you say, wait, this scares me. I'm afraid of what's happening. Oh my goodness. And you have a parachute on, but you never use it because you're terrified of what's going on. Gravity doesn't care that you have a parachute on and don't use it. Or suppose that you buy your emergency supplies, your preparedness supplies, like somebody who went out to buy a parachute, and they take a look around, and all these parachutes, I mean, they're like $1,000 and $2,000, and golly, that's kind of expensive to get into the parachute jumping business. So you look around, and you find this guy that's down an alley, and he says, hey, buddy, want to buy a parachute really cheap? $19.95. You can have one. You know, it was only used by a little old colonel who jumped on Sundays, 20 years ago. And so you buy this parachute, this moth-eaten parachute, but it makes you feel good. You've got the pack and you've got the straps and it feels like a parachute. And there you are, you jump out of this plane, you fall out of this plane, you get thrown out of this plane, you're plummeting to earth, you pull the ripcord, this thing blossoms above you and then shreds. And you say, wait, you're having this conversation with gravity, you see. We might call it a very grave conversation. You're having this conversation, and you're saying, I got a parachute, see? I have one. And gravity says, yeah, so? Doesn't make any difference that it's no good. Gravity doesn't care. All right. That's how we use the preparedness parachutes or the survival parachutes, that analogy. Think about this. If you think about a parachute, first off, you have to actually have it before you need it. Okay? You have to have it with you when you need it. You have to actually use it when you need it, and it has to be one of quality. That's the principle. That's the concept. So let's go to our preparedness and our emergency and our survival supplies. You've got to have them before you need them. You've got to have them with you when you need them. You have to actually use them, and they have to be of life-saving quality or you've lost the battle. All right, so that's the parachute concept. Now, here are the survival parachute items. There's 4 of them, okay? Number 1, the first one is, very, very simply, it's clothing. Clothing is the first of the survival parachutes. Why would we say clothing is a parachute? Well, take a look at the conditions I'm in right now. I mean, this is a real blizzard. This is great. We're out here, and it's snowing, and the wind's blowing, and it's cold, and all those kinds of things. If I was out here in my bathing suit, now that sounds kind of silly, but if I'm in my bathing suit, you know I'm in trouble. Well, if I'm just out here in regular street clothes, you know, just a shirt and a pair of jeans and what have you, I don't have very long. Or even if I put on a little more clothing, if it's not adequate to take care of me for the whole time that I'm out here, I'm in trouble after a little while. And clothing is a parachute because one of the worst things that can happen to most people is if you're thrown out into the environment when conditions are bad. Now, here we are, we're talking about cold and winter and snow. It can also be dealing with the heat and the extreme heat because clothing is a thing that'll protect you there also. If you have the right clothing, you know how to use it. So the concept of clothing is that it is your personal, portable, protection, shelter system. It's what takes care of you in that environment if you've lost all the other things around you. And in emergencies, that's what may happen. Now, if you understand that concept, you say, well, okay, if I don't have the right clothing, how do you make up for that? Well, that's when we start having to need some shelter and to need some fire. But the problem with being dependent on shelter and fire is they may be not very reliable, particularly if you have extreme weather conditions that may take out utilities, or if you find yourself outside, or if the car is stuck and you're out there and you don't have any heat after you run out of gas. I mean, there's all kinds of scenarios we can look at and simply say, I don't have a reliable source of shelter and fire together to take care of my lousy clothing that I have. That's why clothing is such an important thing to have and understand that that's your first line of protection. Number two is water. How long do we live without water? We normally say that if you have about 3 days and you have no intake of fluid or water, you're going to be in trouble. As a matter of fact, some people will die by 3 days. Now, maybe somebody makes it 4, 5, or 6, but what's the point? You have to have water. We don't live very long without water. So we must have water. Now, not only do you need water, it must be quality water. I don't know if you appreciate this or not, but do you know what the leading cause of death on planet Earth is right now? What more people die from today than anything else? It is dysentery, uncontrolled diarrhea. You know where it comes from? Contaminated water. So not only must you have an adequate supply of water, it must also be quality water. It must be safe to drink. We say it's potable water. That's water that you can consume. All right, so water is number 2 parachute because you don't live very long without it. The number 3 parachute, now this is one that most people don't think much about. You don't hear much about. Most people don't say much about it because in our system things work automatically so well that we don't even have to be concerned about it too much. Very, very simply, that is sanitation. Sanitation is a parachute because if you have the clothing, you have the water, you have food, you have all the things that you'd want, and you're going to be okay for months and months and months, and whatever the condition is, if you get some sickness, some disease, if you get uncontrolled diarrhea, dysentery, if you get typhus, if you get cholera and those kinds of things, and you die from one of those diseases, then your other stuff has been of no value. The reason it's a parachute is because the problem of sanitation comes on very, very quickly. It may take it a little while for the effects of that problem to manifest themselves, but it starts from day one. You've got to pay attention to it. So you can get in trouble in a hurry is the bottom line. All right. So we have clothing, water, sanitation. Number 4 parachute is kind of a catch-all, and very simply it's this. I call it special needs. Now, notice one of the things that is not a parachute in here. I didn't say that food is a parachute item. Why? I mean, we like eating. I enjoy eating. But how long does it take most of us to starve to death or to be hurt without eating? It's going to take several weeks. It may take a month or more. So food is not a parachute item because you don't get in trouble immediately unless you have some special nutritional needs or some health needs that say, you know what, I have to have certain kinds of foods and I have to eat 3, 4, 5, 10 times a day, whatever it is, or some very specialized things that I must have. Other kinds of special needs would include things like, well, medications, diabetic supplies or test strips, things like that. Here's another special need. It's kind of a simple one. It's not one that's terribly life-threatening, but it's like my glasses. Okay, when things get a little close, I have a harder time reading them now at my age, and so I would want to have spare glasses so that I would be able to see things when they get close. By the way, it's winter out here. This is great. So I'm going to put my gloves back on. Get your hands cold in a hurry. That's why it's so great to have clothing like this that takes care of you in this environment. It's just tremendous. Well, see, the special needs are things that you will have to determine what they are. For myself, I really don't have any of these extreme special needs. Certainly the glasses would be nice, but I can see very well without them unless it's just very, very close. So you take a look at what your needs are, the people around you. Consider this, pets and animals that we have a responsibility for. Children, infants especially. That's a special need that you have to take care of and make provisions for. All right, so there are our preparedness parachutes. Again, the concept is you have to have it before you need it. You must actually have it when you need it. You must know how to use these things, and then you have to actually use them, and they must be of quality to take care of you in the conditions that you're in. And those survival parachutes are clothing, water, sanitation, and then the special needs depending on what your circumstances are. That's category one, or part one of wilderness wisdom. All right, what happens if we're talking about situations that are going to go much longer than just a few days or maybe a week or something like that? See, that's where the survival parachutes come in. We're talking about things that are very, very short term. But what happens if it's longer term than that? I call that the permanent provisions, meaning things that are long term. Here are the 8 things that make up the permanent provisions. Number one, in fact, it starts out just like we have the survival parachutes. Number one is clothing. Number 2 is water. Number 3 is sanitation. But number 4 now becomes nutrition. You know, we're okay for a few days, maybe a week or so without eating much of anything. Most people are going to be okay with that. It's uncomfortable. It may be unpleasant, but it's not really going to hurt you. But once you get longer than that, we really do need to eat. Nutrition is important. And notice that I didn't say food, I said nutrition, because there's more to nutrition than just calories and things you eat. We want things that will sustain us, be bodybuilding and strengthening. And here's one of the things to consider about emergency or survival situations. You need better nutrition then than you need in, I'll say, more normal conditions, because you're under stress. And stress nutrition requires better kinds of foods, better kinds of nutritional input. All right, so we have nutrition, then shelter. You know, I'm okay the way that I'm dressed, this clothing, which, by the way, you'll learn a lot about this clothing in part 2 of this series, because we talk all about the clothing technology that I teach people to do and other options that you have. I could live out here literally 24/7 for day after day after day using this clothing we call the PALS system. But it gets a little tiresome after a while, and you don't necessarily rest as well if you're just out in it. So as a part of being healthy and strong, shelter becomes important after a while so that you can just rest, you can kick back. So we like to see some shelter. Then we have a general thing that I call wellness. Now, wellness, obviously, food and water are part of wellness, but now we're talking about rest that I was just mentioning inside of shelter. You have things about taking care of the body. You have things about recreation. That's a very important one where you just kind of step back. Now, for me, music is an important part of my wellness. When things get very stressful, I want to put on a pair of headphones and just slip inside of a symphony or something like that. I can just lose myself in the imagery of those things. It'll be different for different people. Maybe it's some games. Pay particular attention to children and how you would help them, because their world may have turned upside down. You want to be able to distract them and take care of them. So there's all kinds of little wellness things to consider. Then we have tools. You must have some, you know, when I talk about tools, this thing you see all the time, and pull it out here, it's on my lanyard. This is a tool. This pocket knife is a tool. And notice I have it on my lanyard so I don't lose it out here in the snow. That's a tool. There's other kinds of tools that you'd have around you. One of them, you see, when I talk about tools, it's different than just pliers and screwdrivers and pocket knives. Fire is a tool. Fire is a tool that allows you to cook, to process, to sanitize, to light, and things like that. So we have all kinds of tool categories that we want to take a look at. And then we have supplies. These are some of the things that you would use up, besides just the food and the water, which are obviously supplies. Well, there you have it in a brief overview, what I call wilderness wisdom, which is all about the stuff that you need to be okay when your world goes upside down.